My prediction, that pattern probably does follow. I call my channel what I call it because I literally could have been a millennial if I'd been born just days earlier. But, as a result of being born in January of 97 instead of December of 96, I am technically Gen Z. So what's up, everybody? It's Henry. Welcome to the channel, Millennial Nexus, because I am the nexus point of millennials and Gen Z. Today, I wanted to watch and react to this Infographics show video called Gen Z versus Millennials. Which is worse to be in 2025? I have not watched it yet, but we're going to watch it together. We're going to see what it has to say, and we'll figure out whether I should be glad to have been born when I was, or feel like I should have been a millennial. We'll see which one is worse to be today, but before we do that, be sure to give this video a like, comment what you think about all this, especially if you agree that this whole generational divide is a little questionable, a little kind of arbitrary, like one of my friends says, and he happens to be a friend who is a really young millennial. Like, we were in the same graduating class, so as I said before, and I'm going to say it again, my graduating class, high school class, was the last of the millennials and the first of the Zoomers. Let that sink in. It happens from time to time. But yeah, anyway, let's not waste any more time. Let's see what Infographics has to say about all this.
Gen Z has it rough. Your cousin pipes up over the dinner table. Did you know over a third of us struggle with mental health? You shove another spoonful of mashed potatoes in your mouth before you can say, at least you didn't graduate college in the middle of a massive recession, and then kick off another Millennial versus Gen Z battle on family night. But is it all in the eye of the beholder, or does one generation really have it rougher right now? Find out on this episode of the Infographics Show, Millennials versus Generation Z. Which is worse to be in 2025? Every generation thinks the next is...
I'm just going to come out and say it. I think that there are pros and cons to all of the generations, like which one you fall into. Like, for example, I can't think of a good example right now.
ruining everything they built, but it's usually just a case of social change. Parents moan, kids rebel, and life goes on. But with rising costs, stagnant wages, and an economy that feels like it's on life support, those generational tensions aren't just awkward, they're boiling over. Many of the younger generations feel like they're being left behind, and the older generations have built a world that doesn't really work for them. And as things get tougher, even the younger generations are starting to spar more. It's kids versus kids. Wait, millennials are how old? That can't be right. Millennials are the generation that started in 1981 and continued until 1996. They grew up in an age of relative peace, and it seemed like that would never stop, until it did in a big way. The 9/11 attacks and the wars that followed defined their teen years and early adulthood. Their entry into the job market and early career years were heavily impacted by the Great Recession of 2008, and that led many of them to come of age with fewer career prospects. And
That's if you're one of the older millennials. Like, if you're born in 81, yeah, that recession kind of messed with your odds for that. If you were born in 96, like half of my high school graduating class, I guess it wasn't too bad. Really, it would have been, actually, it would have been better than being born in late 97 or beyond, and then having been in the college graduating class of 2020 when, well, everything was shut down. You all know the beer bug lore.
much less settled world than they were expecting. And that was the world the next generation was coming up in. Gen Z never knew the calm, comfortable world of the 90s. And as they were entering school, the world was already enmeshed in conflict. They might not have...
Yeah, neither did the millennials who were born in, like, I'd say 95 or to 99. Definitely not 99. Like, the reason 97 is the start of Gen Z is because that is way too young to actually be able to remember the 90s in any capacity. One of my 96ers claims to have some kind of memory of the 90s, but generally speaking, Gen Z is where it's at because they're too young to remember the 90s. Now, maybe if you were born in 95 or 94, if you're born between 94 and 96, you let me know in the comments down below if you can have a clear-cut memory from the 90s, especially if you can remember anything about Y2K, like the phenomenon around it. I have a feeling that, say, someone born in 91 or 92 would be able to remember it clear as day. But then 93 beyond, yeah, that's when you start getting into whether they're actually able to remember it, less likely to remember it.
Felt the impact of the Great Recession in the same way, although if their parents were laid off, they definitely noticed some change. Instead, their lives were largely defined by the fast advance of technology, as they were the first digital natives. But for many of them, their lives were completely upended by the COVID-19 pandemic, missing months or even years of in-person school.
Now, if you were born in the first half of 97 and graduated college in 2019,
And having to adjust fast to a remote world. Many missed out on critical life milestones only to have the world snap back to a normal that never quite got back to normal. And if you ask the older generation, that's left both generations a mess. The disputes between millennials and Gen Z are mostly online and petty. Millennials would like Gen Z to look up from their phone once in a while, and Gen Z wants millennials to get over Harry Potter already. But there's one
I'm Gen Z, and I'm still a Harry Potter fan. Like, I remember 14 years ago this month going to see the Deathly Hallows Part 2, being really amped for it at 14. Yeah, you get the idea. That's why, hence why I am a Zillennial. I am old enough to remember the Harry Potter hype, but I'm not so old that I'm able to clearly remember going to see all of them in the theater. I did not see any of them in the theater until Order of the Phoenix. No, really. I was 4 years old when Sorcerer's Stone came out, 5 when the Chamber of Secrets came out, 7 for Prisoner of Azkaban, and then 8 for The Goblet of Fire. Although I did eventually get to rent the DVD for that. Getting back to the video,
difference between those two generations and past generation scraps. Millennials typically aren't the parents of Gen Z. There's enough of a gap between them that older millennials could easily have younger Gen Z kids. Millennials have largely delayed having kids, unlike past generations. This has led to both generations to sort of find themselves in the same place in life, and that spot is getting awfully crowded. One of the biggest challenges both generations faced was finding steady work. The economy contracted due to both recession and COVID, and then there was the decline in full-time work being matched with an increase in part-time gig work. This has led to an increase in hustle culture as young people balance several part-time jobs instead of one full-time job. This can sometimes allow for more freedom, such as someone sending a YouTube script to their employer while on a beach in Santa Monica, but it often comes with downsides like a lack of health benefits and work shifting with demand. And
I believe there are freelancer health insurance plans that you can pay into or buy. I am so tired of health insurance being tied to a job. I'm just gonna say it. I've done multiple videos about why that's a terrible arrangement. Should never have been a thing. As far as I'm concerned, employers should only pay employees in financial compensation, replace anything even resembling a pizza party with a bonus of any amount or a raise, and then let them celebrate in their own way. At least that's what I would do.
generations are saying, hey, it's not us, it's you. Both generations have struggled with finding full-time jobs, with the biggest challenge for the millennials being that fewer companies were hiring when it was their time to enter the job market. It took years to recover from the Great Recession, and many still find themselves behind the 8 ball. But for Gen Z, it's another problem, and maybe a bigger one. Employers don't want to hire Gen Z employees because, well, they find them hard to work with, and they're not shy about sharing their opinions. In fact, a plurality of every generation picked Gen Z as the worst generation to work with, including fellow Gen Zs. To which Gen Z says, huh? I was on my phone. In 2024, a survey
Yeah, I suspect that those born a little later into the 90s, if not those born in the 21st century, probably have a bit more of a problem with that, comparatively speaking. Yeah, that's the thing about our phones being an essential tool in the game of life. I'd like to think it's more than just scrolling TikTok and such.
1,500 adults was conducted about their experiences with their colleagues, and between 38 and 45% of each group picked Gen Z as the worst colleagues. The common complaints indicated were over-reliance on technology, lack of attention span, and a lack of loyalty to the company. Gen Z responds by saying they actually have a
Yeah, that's a Gen Z thing I can relate with. I don't think any one company should be put on a pedestal, whether it's an employer or some company that you do that. Like I mentioned before, I am a Nintendo adult, but that doesn't mean that I think Nintendo is the only place to, well, okay, it's the only console I have right now, but I'm looking at getting into PC gaming with a Lenovo Legion Go or something because I want to back up in the event that, what is it? In the event that my Switch 2 is wrongfully bricked. Not to mention, I did still enjoy the games I could get and play with the PS5 and Xbox Series S, but I'd rather get it all into one device that has the same form factor as the Nintendo Switch. According to Grok, Lenovo Legion Go is the best route to go because it has better processing power.
and work-life balance, and they are interested in complying with the way things were done in the past. This generation is far more willing to call out workplace politics and decisions of the boss, which may feel good, but may not help their job prospects. And it's a very different story for millennials. By contrast, on average, 42% of respondents picked millennials as their favorite generational cohort to work with. This might be because they're the best of both worlds. They know technology well, but they aren't overly dependent on it. After all, this is the generation that grew up with a slow-moving home computer, graduated to high-speed internet, and then eventually got a smartphone. They can get along well with all generations, and their rough start
I'm Gen Z, and I didn't have my first smartphone until I was 19. The millennials I went to high school with that were born between 94 and 96, and I think as late as 90, early as 93. Yeah, late 93 to 96. Some of them had smartphones, some didn't. Nah, it really felt like everyone around me had a smartphone in high school, but I was still using a flip phone and I had an iPod Touch, which I appreciated. And you know what? I think maybe it's for the better that I didn't have access to the internet everywhere. I actually even didn't really have an incentive to pay for an iPhone out of pocket because that was the only way I could get one because my parents were willing to put me on a data plan, but they weren't willing to subsidize an iPhone for me. Even at 19, I had to eventually pay my dad back for the iPhone SE1 that I got in 2016 so I could play Pokemon Go. It was worth it. I'll say that much.
the workplace generally makes them eager to please and to do what's needed to make a good impression. But the problem is, it may not matter. Millennials have a much stronger footing in the workplace in terms of how people view them, but in terms of new hires, it's still consistently easier for people to get hired right out of college than to find a full-time position a decade later. So for those Gen Zs who manage to get a job and keep one, they might find themselves quickly promoted above their millennial counterparts. But in terms of keeping those jobs, unless they bring up those Q scores among their coworkers, it might be a bigger challenge. But work results are just part of the picture. What about money? Millennials typically do have more money in the bank than Gen Z. At least we should hope so. After all, they've got a 10 to 15 year head start and are no doubt starting to look ahead to retirement, even if retirement plans seem like a pipe dream for many at this point. But when you look at progression it becomes a much thornier topic. In 2024, it was found that Gen Z's youth unemployment rate was actually the lowest it had been since 1991. 87% of Gen Z reports having a job, and that gives them a lot more flexibility than millennials had at the time. But under the surface, there are some other concerns brewing. In terms of unemployment and raw money earned at this point in their lives, things look good for Gen Z. But when you look deeper, they might be as far away from the American dream as their millennial counterparts were, or even further away. Credit reporting agency TransUnion adjusted the numbers for inflation and found that 20-somethings today were averaging a salary of $45,000, while millennials who were employed at the time were earning an average of just under $52,000 adjusted. The average was
Translation: wages did not keep up with inflation.
likely skewed by the high unemployment rate at the time, but there is another problem bubbling up. Money doesn't go as far because everything costs more. Inflation has been skyrocketing, and anyone who doesn't have a healthy nest egg already in place finds their bank account dwindling faster and faster. This is especially a problem for Gen Z, who are finding that basic groceries are growing out of their price range. And then they have to deal with the boomers saying, lay off the avocado toast or you'll never buy a house. But seriously, that avocado toast is getting really expensive. This has left the generation with a much higher debt-to-income ratio of around 16%. But hey,
I actually watched a video the other day from some financial dude. I'm gonna see if I can pull up the title. But suffice it to say, he said that instead of getting fast food 3 times a week, he said something that would sound like financial advice if I say it out loud, so I'm not going to repeat it. Let's see, where is it? Oh, I think I went too far back. Ah, here we go. How Fast Food is Secretly Making You Broke by Bennett Fong. Go check that out if you want to find out how fast food is essentially draining your bank account. Which I could say is something similar about going to see a movie every single week. But we're not here to talk about that. Let's get back to the Millennial versus Gen Z video.
at least there are credit cards, right? Buy now, pay later. Gen Z is growing up in a generation where cashless and contactless payments are the norm, and that's led many of them to think of budgets less as a hard rule and as a more of a suggestion. The average credit card balance for a Gen Z member is around 25%.
Yeah, this is why some people suggest paying with cash as often as possible to feel the pain of parting. I think that's a garbage suggestion because the problem is not inherently the form of payment, although I do think cash is way less convenient. You gotta have the willpower. You've gotta learn to use spreadsheets. You've gotta learn to look at what you have and then use spreadsheets to forecast how far you can go. I do it with money, I do it with groceries, with food in particular. I've done videos about those. Go check them out on the channel. Getting back to this one.
Higher than it was for a young millennial a decade ago. But for many of them, they're not thinking about that today. They're thinking about how delicious that triple mocha frappuccino will be, especially after it's given an extra shot of caramel. But for millennials, it's a very different story, and one that's hard to catch up on. When millennials were coming of age in the dawning of the Great Recession, many were forced to make a lot of sacrifices. That often meant dialing back on the big purchases, which meant much less credit card use. Cash was still taken everywhere back then, after all, but that led to an unpleasant surprise, as not using credit cards can have the same effect as using them too much. You don't have the good credit score you need to prove that you're a responsible borrower. So when it's time for a big purchase, you are in trouble. And that leads to the next big stumbling block for both generations, housing. For millennials, it was a long, hard battle to get above water in terms of homeownership. Many millennials wound up living with their parents into their late 20s or even 30s, as it was a great way to save money if you didn't mind giving mom your opinion on knitting patterns and listening to dad's conspiracy theories. Others found themselves renting and watching that money go to their landlord's pockets each month. But as of 2024, 51.5% of millennials are homeowners, leaving many hoping that it's only uphill from here. But for Gen Z, is the story any different? For Gen Z, only 27.
Yeah, I think they've just finally reached a point where they could afford to buy a home. I remember the stress reduction mindfulness teacher I had was very young Gen X. She said that she was grateful that she was able to buy a home when she was able to.
0.8% currently own homes, around half the rate of millennials. But the oldest Gen Zers are only 26 years old, so this actually puts them ahead of millennials and Gen X in the race. Both generations had a slightly lower rate at the time, but they currently make up only 3% of the homeowner market. While the majority say they plan to buy a home in the next 6 years, they're entering the market with the lowest average income and a dwindling supply of housing, as private equity buys up more and more of the market, causing prices to skyrocket. And first comes the house, then comes, well, people to put in it. One of the key distinctions of millennials is that they're seen as the latest generation to get married and have kids. This is largely because their lives were disrupted by the economic collapse, causing many of them to struggle to get to the financial point where they felt comfortable having a family. And as many of them approach 40, they feel like the clock is ticking. In 2019, only 44% of millennials were married, well below the percentage of baby boomers and Gen X adults who were married at the same time. In fact, the percentage has been shrinking with every generation. Does this pattern follow for Gen Z? And more
My prediction, that pattern probably does follow.
importantly, do they care? The percentage of Gen Z who is married is obviously in flux because they're so young, but they're trending well below the average for even millennials. It's estimated that just under 60% of Gen Z will ever marry, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Gen Z tends to date less, preferring to interact online. Additionally, the state of the economy makes finding the right time to combine households tricky. And maybe the biggest X factor, Gen Z has the largest percentage of adults identifying as LGBTQ, a surprising 28%. This number has increased with every generation, as identifying as queer has become more socially and legally acceptable. While gay marriage is now legal in most Western countries, including the United States, the percentage who are married is still far below the average, which raises the next big question: what about children? Much like with marriage, both generations have seen a decline in the number of people who have children. It's estimated that as of 2021, around 55% of millennial women have given birth. This is 9% below the rate of baby boomers and 7% below the rate of Gen X. Similar to marriage, this is largely the result of the economy making having a child a very daunting prospect. There's also a greater career focus among women, making them delay the big decision of marriage and children until their 30s. But it's also become way more normalized for millennial adults to just say, yeah, not for me, and lean all the way into the joys of being single or living that blissful double income, no kids life with all the disposable income, assuming they have disposable income. And Gen Z may be taking that trend and doubling down on it. Only 16% of Gen Z currently have kids, which is to be expected. It's still a young generation. Decades of sex education and teen pregnancy prevention programs have done what they're supposed to do. But polls show that only 55% of the population says they intend to have children, and almost a full third of the young population say they're sure they don't want to have children. If this all bears out and they don't get an unexpected call from a one-night stand, that would mean a dramatic decline in the population of the next generation. And there might be one reason for all of this that has nothing to do with their financial prospects. Both millennials and Gen Z are deeply worried about the state of the world. Millennials grew up in a world defined by war and a recession, and Gen Z are very much hoping the world doesn't take the same direction. However, they're just as concerned with another factor, the Earth itself. Climate change anxiety is sky high amongst Gen Z, and many wonder if there will even be a world to raise kids in. And with fears of the oceans rising and the world becoming unlivable, a growing number ask if it's even ethical to bring kids into the world, which means that in many ways, the kids are not all right. It might seem like mental health is a much bigger crisis for millennials and Gen Z compared to older generations, especially given how many of them struggle with anxiety, depression, and other psychological disorders. But there is one big X factor in all of this. The older generations likely just didn't talk about it or have a word for it. The baby boomers likely grew up with an omnipresent sense of anxiety about the state of the world, given the constant threat of, well, nuclear annihilation. But if a kid tried to talk about their anxiety to their parents or teacher, they were more likely to just be told not to worry about it and practice their ducking and covering. But even for those who are struggling, it's not always the same situation. Millennials are much more likely to give concrete reasons for their anxiety. They'll talk about financial concerns, political concerns, and the environment. But for Gen Z,
Yeah, I'd say it's reasonable to argue that there's always going to be something to worry about. Like I always say, I feel like those who want to have kids should be free to do so, and they should feel like they can. I believe it should be an option, and I believe everyone's choices should be respected one way or another. Yeah, a lot of this stuff I can sympathize with. It's really the climate stuff I feel like so gradual, and a lot of predictions have been wrong. I'm a little mixed on that. I believe that it is a thing. I believe that the climate does change. The question, it really is, how much, and can we really foresee all of this so easily? Here's the thing. When it comes to hurricanes and such, meteorologists need a very wide error margin for predicting the storm's path. They can't even tell you how lightning forms. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we can innovate our way out of it. I'm just gonna leave it at that for now.
they're more likely to report a general sense of anxiety and malaise. And while there's no direct cause for it, many analysts point to one thing: COVID. The world seemed to stop and disrupt everything back then. This meant that many Gen Z members missed out on proms, high school graduations, and college graduations, and it took well over a year for things to get back to normal. Since then, the political and
Not this Zoomer. I'd literally got the instant gratification job right as the shutdowns were coming underway. But yeah, it definitely made it a lot more difficult to track down a 9 to 5 job or a more degree relevant job. I will admit that. And it definitely derailed my plans to try and get into screenwriting. That and my reluctance to move to California to do that was part of it.
social scene has been more and more unsettled. These young people emerged into a chaotic, disturbing world, and many have been wondering when their lives will actually begin. And that kind of anxiety doesn't just take its toll on the mind, it takes its toll on the body. The younger generation is less likely to
So basically, Gen Z is pretty much like Rapunzel at the beginning of Tangled, wondering, when will my life begin? That was the name of the song, right? The This Is Who I Am song? Or whatever they call it in the typical Disney movie. Sorry, I just need to look up the title of that really quick. Ah, here we go. When Will My Life Begin from the Tangled soundtrack. I would sing it, but I don't want Disney to sue me or restrict this video. Go watch Tangled. It's a good movie.
follow orthodoxy when it comes to medical advice, and that's both a negative and a positive. While older generations would go to a trusted family doctor for advice, many Gen Zers are more likely to go directly to TikTok. Influencers might not be the best source for advice on medical.
Yeah, do not go to social media for medical advice. Talk to your doctor. And if you don't trust your doctor, find another doctor. Talk to a doctor, a licensed physician. I'm sorry, I just had to get that out there.
Issues, and many are just openly lying or spreading conspiracy theories. But one thing that Gen Z might have going for it is that many are very open about their health issues, even joining online support groups to share and discuss symptoms. And that means that many won't be grinning and bearing it until a minor problem becomes a major one. But there's one area where Gen Z might have a big edge on their millennial counterparts. Younger.
Yeah, preventative care. That's the kind of thing that insurance companies will cover completely, and I think that's something we could all be a little more mindful of rather than wait for it to become a more serious problem. Like my experience with back pain at the start of April and how my insurance company left me with a very minimal copay for the visit and for the CT scan that confirmed it was not a kidney stone, which, say what you will about the American healthcare system, it's speedy, it's efficient. If you have insurance, it should cover things for the most part. You might still have to pay something, but I'd rather pay something for immediate results or as immediate as possible rather than be put on a 13-month wait list for something that I'll be very lucky to be alive for, assuming there is something to worry about, like that woman in Canada who had to wait until March of 2026 to get a brain scan to detect a possible brain tumor. Next time you get a bill for something you have to pay for medical thing in America, think long and hard about how you were able to get it quickly or within a reasonable amount of time, comparatively speaking. Again, I'm always going to come back to that 13-month wait list in Canada if I ever start to think that the American healthcare system is the worst. It's not the best, I will admit that. It's not perfect, but it's certainly a better option than having to wait 13 months for something you'll be very lucky to be alive for, and even luckier if they're still able to do something about it. Sorry about that rant. Back to the video.
Generations tend to live longer than the ones before them, barring a massive crisis like a plague or a world war that hits the young disproportionately. This is due to the advances in medical care, as well as to greater knowledge of what causes an early death. And so far, Gen Z has been outpacing millennials in a big way when it comes to avoiding the major risk factors. Only 3.8% of Gen Z members report smoking in the last 30 days, compared to 28.5% of millennials. Similarly,
I am so proud of that. I really hope that the number actually goes down the more Gen Zers turn 18. I think these are just adults, or
major risk factors. Only 3.8% of Gen Z members report smoking in the last 30 days, compared to 28.5% of millennials. Similarly,
yeah, that's overall. You gotta take into account that the youngest Zoomers are still in high school, so they either aren't doing that because they're not able to they're not able to gain access to the cigarettes, or they haven't reported it because they're either not being asked, or they don't, or if they are, they're not going to admit that.
just under half of millennials say they drank alcohol in the last 30 days, compared to under a quarter of Gen Z. Cannabis is more even, with 23.9% of millennials and 16% of Gen Z using it last month. The one area where Gen Z has the unfortunate edge, vaping, which is rising fast amongst the young. And there is one big reason for this: it's expensive. Gen Z might have actually lucked out.
You've got to do better, Gen Z.
Breathe air. You don't need a vape.
Honestly, as far as I can tell, smoking anything does not seem like a good idea.
When it comes to the high rates of inflation, both drinking and smoking suck a huge amount of money out of the pocketbook each month, with smoking being particularly prohibitive due to state laws levying heavy taxes on cigarettes to discourage smoking. That means that Gen Z, who never had the chance to get addicted to smoking and drinking back when the economy was still booming, looked at the initial cost of entry and decided, no way, not for me, while the millennials who had already started were locked in unless they wanted to do the hard work of quitting. And it's not the only area where Gen Z is asking, is this really worth it? It's been a meme for a while. Millennials are killing mayonnaise and anything else they might not be buying on the same level as boomers or Gen X. But it's actually Gen Z that seems to be changing their consumer habits in a big way. This generation is the first since the greatest generation to be really budget conscious, and it's hitting some key locations. They're notoriously cost shy when it comes to dining out, with many looking for budget hacks like ordering split entrees and appetizers, or even kids menu items instead of full entrees. They're also much fun.
Yeah, personally, I've learned to make things at home, though I am planning an outing to Boston for the day as I record this. I'm not going to say too much more because I don't know if I'm going to end up publishing this before or after that. I'll leave it at that. But I am very budget conscious. I'm going through and looking at the prices of everything I want to do.
Of casual dining places than they are of fine dining. And in general, they're less fond of in-person socialization, which is a double-edged sword, as Gen Z is the first digital native generation.
Guilty, Your Honor. Yeah, in-person socialization. I'll admit, I have actually gotten really drowsy during that. I can't really explain it. I just get really drowsy during that sometimes. Like 2021, I remember going to hang out with some of my friends, and I was like half asleep on the couch. Yeah, I can't really explain it. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Let me know in the comments down below if you experience this too.
They meet most of their friends online, and that means they can save money by dating virtually for the first few times. In fact, many of them don't need to leave the house much at all. They can get food and groceries delivered, many of them work remotely for an employer or have several online gigs, and much of their recreation is online. You don't need to go to the arcade to play video games anymore. While millennials still grew up in an era where the mall and the
Yeah, that's why Chuck's Arcade is pandering to adults, and that's why I say it's not a bad thing for Chuck's Arcade to market itself towards adults. And it's why I'm not against there being adults only spaces for things like that. You know, there should be a place where adults can go out and have fun. Yes, if you have kids, you have to do a little more planning. That is simply the reality of having kids.
town square were the core of social life. That can't be said for Gen Z. And that's added up to one rather heavy problem. While Gen Z still has a major health edge on millennials when it comes to avoiding major health risks, they also don't do something that's essential for health: exercise. Exercise rates dropped for Gen Z amid the pandemic as gyms were shuttered and many people turned to stress eating to avoid the news. And they haven't rebounded since. In 2022, a poll showed that in the first 3 months of the year, less than half of Gen Z adults exercised at least once a week. This has opened them to other health risks, and it's believed that
That's new to me. I didn't know about the decline in exercise from Gen Z. But yeah, me personally, I am striving to do better. I'll admit I wasn't the best about exercising over the years, though I did win Student of the Month in gym class. No, true story. Yes, I know that if you're watching this and you probably left a comment calling out my weight, you might be shocked to learn I was Student of the Month in gym class in freshman year of high school. It happened. That's a topic for another day, though. I'll tell that story separately.
Z will have higher rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes than their millennial counterparts. And if it seems like this paints a confusing picture of who has it worse, you're right. If you ask most people, they'd probably rather be a Gen Z right now. They're trending ahead of where millennials were economically due to the lack of a world-spanning recession. For now, and they mostly have healthier habits. Also, they're digital natives in a digital world, and they're well equipped for adjusting to whatever comes next when it comes to high-tech innovations. The only people who might disagree, Gen Z themselves, who are filled with far more anxiety about their future than any other generation has been, and have lower rates of satisfaction than millennials. To many of them, the world looks uncertain, and they worry about their own future and the future of the younger Gen Alpha. To which the boomers will likely say, "Quit your whining and get a real job." Want to know more about the generational structures that have defined the last century and why they always seem to be yelling at each other? Check out Every Generation Explained in 10 minutes, or watch this video instead.
Boomers aren't completely wrong about that. At a certain point, you have to accept you can only control yourself. That's what one of my mom's cousins' husbands said to me once. Who is actually a boomer to my knowledge. Yeah, he's older than that particular cousin of my mother who was born in 65, making her the oldest of Gen X. Meaning almost everyone older than her is either a boomer or a silent Jenner. Interesting to think about is also. I'm going to wrap it up here for the video before I go on too long of a ramble about anything else. As you can see, it's probably better to be Gen Z right now because you have more time in front of you. Even if it's only like a decade more, assuming you make it to life expectancy. Obviously, you do need to do some kind of exercise. It can be as simple as going for a walk first thing as often as possible. Rest days are necessary, but don't lean on them for too long. And maybe I should stop getting ice cream every time Star Market puts it on sale, or if I do, I should learn to stretch it out longer. So I'm going to wrap it up here. You let me know in the comments down below what you think about this, whether you're a millennial, zillennial, or zoomer. I'd love to know your take on this, whether you're a millennial who agrees that Gen Z has it pretty good, or if you've observed Gen Z be terrible employees. Or if you're a Gen Z who disagrees with some of this stuff, you let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for daily videos from a man of cultural commentary from a man caught between generations. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.